it was always to not go to my job. Like for me, corporate America was not a place I ever intended to be or wanted to be, and how I ended up there as long as I was, I'll never understand it. So I shifted the focus from making money independent of a job so I could sustain myself to eliminating the need for money, so that that was no longer the drive. And house hacking provided that. Your biggest expense is the place you live. You go to work every day to put a roof over your head. If you could eliminate that expense, what different choices would you be able to make?
Welcome to the Real Estate and Financial Independence Podcast. I'm your host, Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about helping you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. Whether you're a long-time listener or a first-time listener, thank you for being back for another episode. The title of today's episode is How to Leave Your Corporate Job and Become Financially Independent. This is an interview with Antoinette Monroe, and as the title implies, she had a corporate job. She went through college and kind of followed the same path that a lot of us do to get economic security, to pay the bills, but she had sort of this itch for more freedom, more flexibility, to be an entrepreneur. And so this interview is all about her path and the steps she took, some of them kind of accidental at first, using her residence to buy a fixer-upper, but also to start house hacking it, and then using her residence to kind of build on that and buy just a few more properties. And the really amazing thing about what Antoinette and her partner have done is they've done it with very few properties, but yet produce a lot of cash flow and been able to get this foundation of flexibility, freedom, to do what they want when they want without having this huge empire of properties. So she's sort of the epitome of the small and mighty investor. And I can't wait for you to hear more details about her story. Now, before we get to this week's interview, it's time for my weekly behind the scenes segment where I share a short snippet of what's going on with me in my real estate investing, finances, or business behind the scenes. And this week, I actually want to take us back a little bit, tell you a story about the early part of my own journey with my wife, and it has to do with a job. So today's episode is about the corporate world, and Antoinette, who you're going to see in the interview, was in a corporate job. But I want to emphasize that this show is a lot about entrepreneurship, it's about freedom, it's about flexibility, which often means leaving your corporate job. But I want to tell a story about the fact that having a job, even a corporate job or in an institution, like my wife was at a university, a small community college, can be a huge benefit and a big part of your journey. And not all of you will necessarily want to leave your job. That having financial independence means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So my wife and I, early when we got married, she was still teaching. She's a Spanish teacher, and she teaches at a community college. And one of the steps of our journey was both of us just saving a lot of money. So I was flipping houses, and my income was more inconsistent. Started buying rental properties a little bit as well. She had the steady income. She had health insurance, which was nice at that point. And so we really balanced each other well. Like when, I was doing pretty well on my own, but then once we got married, combining incomes, having her stability and my growth potential of my business really was a great complement. So some of you might be in similar situations. Maybe you have a partner or a spouse who one of you is the entrepreneur, one of you is working in a corporate job, and just know that that could be an outstanding part of the journey. And even if you plan to transition out of it later on, look at that as a good stepping stone. So for my wife, it was a stepping stone. In 2009, she took kind of a mini retirement where we went to Spain and South America for 3 or 4 months, and she negotiated just time away so that she could still come back and have her job. So that was kind of a step number one, but eventually she did leave her job, but she hasn't left behind the part of the job she loves. So she has gone back to Clemson University, which is another nearby school, and taught there. But she's had the leverage of having financial independence to say, you know what, I can teach 2 classes or I can teach 3 classes. And she doesn't make quite as much money doing that way, but she also doesn't have all the committees and the meetings and all the hassles that come with having a kind of typical job. So just think about that and think about ways you can both use it early on, transition out, and maybe even stay involved at it, either as a consultant or as a part-time worker, and just kind of quarantine or kind of carve out the best parts of your corporate job and do the parts you love, but use your financial independence to have the leverage to negotiate that. So I don't know, I went a lot of different directions with that story, but I just wanted to share that with you about my own experience, my wife's experience having a typical job, and encourage some of you who are in the similar boat. If you like these behind the scenes segment each week, I want to invite you to stay in touch with me beyond the podcast by checking out one of the online courses that I offer. Online courses are a way to interact with me and let me help you with your real estate investing. Some courses are available anytime, and others, like my premier course, Real Estate Deal School, is more of a boot camp style course where you and other students go through live with me as I help you step by step to start purchasing investment properties. You can get details on all of these courses at coachcarson.com/courses. Now let's get started with today's interview. Hey, Antoinette, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Hi, Chad. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is exciting. We have connected online on Instagram a little bit, and I've kind of checked out what you've been up to with your platform and your Instagram channel. And I can't wait to talk about a lot of your story. I want to talk about your real estate investing, of course, and what you've got going on there. But I want to take a step back. It's always fun for me, maybe just to give a highlight, if you don't mind, of just from a financial standpoint, where you are now. But then I want to ask some questions that take us back a little bit and kind of learn more about your story and where you started with all this.
Okay. Well, where I am now, I'm 36. I'm retired from my corporate job. I can say that I'm a millionaire thanks to real estate investing. And I still house hack and live for free. So I have no bills, but income coming in from rentals, millionaire net worth, and I'm only 36. So I'm excited about where I am, especially given where I came from. So, born and raised in the county of Dade, Miami Gardens specifically. I don't think like my mom never made over $15,000 a year. She was a school bus driver. My dad was an AC appliance repair guy. Neither of them got a diploma from high school. So to grow up in that environment where not much is expected of you and to achieve what I've achieved, I'm very proud of that.
That is really amazing. So much to dig in there. 36 years old, you've got income coming in, you're house hacking. And I want to say too, like, thank God for bus drivers and heat and air techs, both in my world. My girl, I love my daughter's bus driver, and I love our heating and air techs because they keep our tenants amazingly cool. But I want to go into that. Let's go back to your family and kind of where you came from, Dade County and Miami. Everybody's got, stories about finances and money and even, about what kind of path you should go on. Like, do you remember, like, in high school or maybe middle school, like, kind of what were some of the things you aspired to at that point? Like, what was it? Was money on your mind at that point, or was this like a later in life kind of thing?
No, I think in high school, I was going to do nails and hair, right? Like, so it depends on where you are. In high school, I was going to be middle school, I was going to be hair and nails, a cosmetologist. I wasn't going to college. And then in high school, I got into auto mechanics. So I was going to be an auto mechanic. It was never really about money. But as I got further into high school, I started to realize that I had to plan for what was next. So my sister was the first in our family to go to college. So at least I got to see that example. And I went through 4 years of high school, being aware that college existed, her telling me I should go, and me being like, oh, I'm going to do hair and nails or open an auto mechanic shop. I don't need to do that. To learning or being able to see how the teachers in my school responded to other students in terms of preparation for college, and recognizing that I needed to get into that. But before then, it wasn't like I was receiving messaging that said that was the only path, because up until my sister, who's a few years older than me, no one else in my family had gone to college. It wasn't something that was mentioned. Like, my mom was smart enough that by the 9th grade, she had a full scholarship to the University of Miami, but she dropped out of high school when she got married, because for her generation, that was the goal to achieve, to get married. And then once you've done that, you don't really need to do anything else. So the money message that I got, mostly, they weren't quite good. I got to experience my parents going through bankruptcy and other difficult times. I know very well how to turn on lights myself, because I've been doing that since elementary school, because that's how often our lights went out. But you can still learn from negative messages.
Yeah. And also having an older sister too. I mean, I was an older brother, and I know that kind of dynamic between siblings, so she kind of took that college path. She was the one who went that direction. Was that and I want to take a step back too, like, cause you mentioned something about being interested in auto mechanics, and that was so interesting. Like what about it kind of drew you to that? And is that still something like with real estate investing and fixing up stuff to, like, do you have that handy bug? Like, can you fix stuff with your hands?
I got the handy bug from my dad. So
Yeah.
I am very handy. A lot of the work in the first project I did myself. Auto mechanics, it was a choice between like home ec and auto mechanics. I was in home ec for 2 semesters and I was failing it. And so they kicked me out of the class. And the only other open elective was auto mechanics. And that worked for me.
Yeah.
So I do like putting things together. I love the before and after. And I guess that kind of bleeds over into like rehabbing properties too.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's something I did not get. I feel like I could figure it out if I really put my mind to it. But like, I'm so admire people who have that natural inclination to take something apart and put it back together, including houses. So I have to depend a lot on other people to do that. Yeah. But okay. So let's kind of go forward a little bit from your story. Like, what you thought you were going to go a certain path. You went a different path. Like what happened from there? What happened after high school?
After high school, I was just like in college. The goal was to get a job, right? Get a job so I didn't have to go back home and I could support myself. So that was my goal, to like make it out, right? So I remember when I got my offer letter finally from a job, that overwhelming feeling of I made it out. Like I don't have to go back home and live the same life or repeat the same experiences that I witnessed in my environment as I grew up. So that was really important to me. It was never, I didn't want a job. I didn't want to build a corporate career, but I knew I had to have a source of income. I had to be able to take care of myself, and that going back home and just living with my parents for good wasn't going to be a good enough option. And I wanted more than that. So the goal was to get a job coming through college. But while I was in college, I got to experience some different things with my internships, interning at different record labels, and I wanted to be in the music industry. But I didn't have a paid opportunity to do that after graduation. So this job was kind of like, let me do this for 2 years, pay off whatever student loans I have, and then I can move back to New York or LA and chase that music dream if it's still there.
So what kind of job did you get, and what was your background or your training at the university?
So I was a business major. I did a 5-year MBA program because I felt like I wasn't going to graduate and then go back and do it again. So let me just go straight through. It was business administration and management. So just kind of general business stuff.
No, from there, so you got the degree, the MBA, and you said, and I just wanted to like kind of follow that thread of like just getting a job. Like, that's such a, it's such a simple thing, but like getting well-paying income, and from your money standpoint, just getting that income coming in like is a huge step up. Like no matter what stage we're at, right? Like getting that income coming in on a rental property, flipping your first house, getting that first job gives you that independence. It's almost like financial oxygen, right? To breathe and say I'm on my own. So it sounds like you were at that stage. And I'm just curious, like what kind of job did you take from there? What kind of career were you pursuing at that step?
Okay. Yeah. So I went to Florida A&M University and I did a 5-year MBA program. And for the business school at FAM, it was very much, right, learn the ropes. They had all of these key partnerships with major corporations. So if you went there, you felt like you knew you were going to have a job before graduation. And I was following that program. But one thing I had to learn throughout the interviews was I was saying the wrong things. I was telling them the truth that I was going to be an entrepreneur when they asked me where I saw myself in 5 years. And it took another entrepreneur to explain to me that I had to tell them what they wanted to hear. And once I made that switch, I was able to get a job offer with PepsiCo into like their management trainee program. So I knew I could do 2 years rotating through different roles, different management functions, and then promote out into a long-term management role. So
I think the thing that's interesting, like you had that entrepreneurial bent, you wanted, and I say as a musician, right? Like I'm going in the music business, having that dream, but the practical side said, all right, let's go in the corporate world, let's get this job. And so you went with Pepsi, and I imagine like having that kind of financial security at that point, like talk to me about like the finances of college. You mentioned paying off debt. You mentioned, saving money. Were there any kind of shifts in your head or kind of things that started, kind of rolling from there when you started having that money coming in?
Yeah. So the college choice was intentional, right? To have the least amount of debt. So I did go to the school that offered me the most scholarships. But in that last semester, I decided to do an unpaid internship in New York at Def Jam. And so I had some debts to cover for that. And then that fifth year for the MBA program, the Pell Grant and the undergrad scholarships I had didn't cover that. So it was really kind of like 1 year of debt that I had to pay off. So taking that job was going to be the key to getting rid of the little bit of debt that I was coming out of college with so that I could go back and be passion driven and just kind of do something regardless of the pay.
All right. Well, take me forward from there. So you've got the college debt, you got that paid off, you got the real job. Obviously, somewhere along the way, you've gotten this bug, like you've re-gotten the bug to get to be an entrepreneur, to go do your own thing. Like, kind of connect the dots for me there from this corporate kind of path and where you are now.
You do forget. So the first 3 years, I was 100% sure like the job is a means to an end. The first 2 years, I'm going to pay off debt. I need to get back home. So I have to work one more year to not have to pay off that reload, save everything I could. But by the end of that third year, the corporate handcuffs started setting in, right? Like it's real perky now, sweet nights at the football game or basketball game, work trips with per diem. You start building relationships and connections, and you start forgetting about your initial cause or your initial dream. And they do a very good job at fostering the company culture. I call it, you're on the stuff. You start drinking the Pepsi.
Yes.
So it gets a little harder, and your vision for yourself, those initial dreams, they start to get blurry. Right now, I'm not really into music anymore. That's no longer the dream, but now I don't know what the dream is at all. I'm just kind of riding the corporate wave and seeing where that takes me. So it wasn't until maybe like the third relocation to Orlando, and then meeting my partner is where things started to shift. So I knew I wasn't happy. I knew the next role would be New York or Chicago, and I didn't want to move back to cold or high cost of living. But I didn't know what I wanted anymore because all of the dreams I had, I'd stopped dreaming and started climbing the corporate ladder. But it was watching him pursue his dream that made me remember like, oh, I had a dream once, or what is my dream now? So that influence really had me thinking about, okay, well, what do I want to do next? What makes me happy? And when I thought about the last time I was engaged or happy to get up every day and go to work, it was when I was working in college for a local entrepreneur managing rental properties and helping him build new construction. So I said I would try it. I would buy a house, try a project. And if it made me as happy now as it did then that would be the direction I would move forward.
Awesome. Well, tell me about that house. So you'd had some experience in college being an intern. Like what was the seed of the idea. It had been planted. What was your next step? Like, how did you find a piece of real estate and find a project and learn about that from kind of starting from what you had before?
Yeah. So the seed was planted at 19. And at 19, I actually bought the first property, but the seed never took roots because it was like 2006. So I bought something and then 2 seconds later, the market crashed and it all fell out. So I was never able to grasp real estate investing is the path. It was just, this was the thing I did. It's not working, move on to something else. So the first property that I bought in Orlando with the intent to try to rediscover that energy, that was where it really took hold. So the first one doesn't count, we scrap it. But the second one was where I was purchasing like, okay, I want to make sure I'm in the best neighborhood, but I'll take the ugliest, oldest house because I know I want to do some work on it and just, see what I'm made of. And I also, at that time, it was very finance-based. I wanted something cheap enough that I could pay off within 5 years so that I could live for free, because I understood that not having a big expense like rent or a mortgage would be the acceleration to me being able to not work. And so the underlying goal in everything was always to not have to go to work every day.
Love it. Seems like you had like an intuition, both like with getting the job of just saying, all right, I don't want to go back home. I need to kind of be on my own 2 feet. And then with this house, like trying to buy a less expensive house, but something that had more, is a good location, but it had a better price so that you could pay it down faster. Like, was that just kind of something you picked up along the way? Do you have a mentor or somebody who kind of taught you that? Because that's a pretty smart way to start, like thinking that, because it's easy to kind of get caught in buy the biggest, nicest thing I can afford. I got a corporate job, but you were definitely like kind of approaching it from a different standpoint.
I was cheap. That's really it. So like growing up in a home with money issues, like my main goal was I don't want to repeat the same mistake. So I was just in general an underspender, live below your means, like trying to avoid debt at all costs, trying to make sure that I never had to go through a bankruptcy or any of those things. So most of it was driven by the avoidance of making bad money decisions, not true awareness of what the decisions I was making would represent. And then the apartment I was living in, I really liked that area. So I kind of just drew a 1 mile radius around it. It's like, I'll sit however long it takes and wait to find something here. It just so happened that there was something that had been vacant for a little while that popped up at low cost. So I bought a steal of a deal, but without any awareness. I just had like a few key things, like this is a good area, let's stay near a good area and be mindful of my price point. But it was just completely unrelated thoughts and motivations that happened to perfectly coalesce into like a great decision.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, sometimes fear and like motivation, not making a mistake can guide you. Right. So I think that's smart. And so tell me a little bit about that house. Like, so what was it like? What did you pay for it? How did you finance that first property?
Okay. So I had a realtor. I found a realtor. I went to a bank to get like a pre-approval from a lender. That lender referred me to a realtor, and that became the person that I worked with. And we had been looking for about 9 months. And not really finding anything. I was pre-approved for like 220, but I didn't want to spend over 200. So it made it much harder, especially given the area that I wanted to be in. So I knew it would take time. So this house we found, it was listed for 169, back in the good old days of 2014 when prices were low. And I was able to get it at the price. It was a 2-bedroom, 1 bath, like 1956 build, and they hadn't done anything to it since it was built. So I had the classic, blue-green carpet, pink tile bathrooms. It was definitely something that was going to need a facelift.
And this was a residence for you. So you and your partner were moving into it and just do the work yourself and just make it happen.
Yeah. So move into it. We probably spent like 4 months doing the renovation. And it took that long because we were actually learning, YouTubing it at the same time. I had a friend that had some experience with doing work. So he was able to come over a couple of days a week and teach us how to hang drywall and do the mud and show us that stuff. So we really cut our teeth on all of it, because every piece of that project, from tearing walls out to putting walls up, reconfiguring the bathroom, we got to learn how to do that stuff. So it took a while to complete it, but it was definitely worth it, right? Like moving forward, a contractor wasn't going to be able to get over on me because I knew firsthand what it took to do the renovation.
Yeah, you learned from the bottom up. You were doing the work yourself. And was it fun? I mean, going back to your, shop in high school class, like, did you enjoy this stuff?
I can't really say that. It's kind of one of those things where once you're in it and you knock down the first wall, there's no way out but through. Yep. So it's like, once you start it, you had to finish, and you're not thinking about enjoyment anymore. It's like, let's just get it done. So I'm going to work full time. I get off work and then we're in that house until 10 o'clock at night through the winter. So no heater, just in there cold. So that part. After, like, I really enjoyed the after, being able to see what I created. That's the best part. And I think that's enough sometimes to pull me through the difficulty of the rehab process.
Yeah. Satisfying more than fun. Like I know some people like the process, but I find myself included, I like the end result. I like the satisfaction of before and after, but so you kind of got that taste of it. You're like, all right, I could do this. I found a property. Like, did this lead you to then become a real estate investor, or how did it go from there? Because right now, since your residence, you're living there, you have a less expensive house, but like, what was the next step for you?
I still wasn't a real estate investor. I was still very much chasing debt freedom and eliminating bills. But once the house was completed, I was like, okay, I have all this debt from doing this. So now I need to figure out how to get rid of it. I was just going to do roommates, but rather than roommates, I tested Airbnb, and that seemed like the right fit. So I think it was completing the project and then starting as an Airbnb host that started to turn me into a real estate investor, because it was like, wow, right? Like I have this business that's tied to a piece of real estate. It's doing more than I could have ever expected. I'm now living completely for free and having extra cash flow per month. And so now I needed to understand what I'd done, right? Because all the decisions I was making up to this point were just kind of, decisions without a holistic plan other than, keep costs low, make good money decisions. So now I had to understand the decisions that I had made and how they led me to where I was, and then how to move forward. So I think it was the combination of those two things that started to have me research different options and understand a path within real estate. So it really wasn't until, like, I remember I was at a wedding, February 2019, where I said, I'm going to be a real estate investor. But from 2015, when I first bought that house, up until that point, I was just kind of, making smart money decisions. And as I would tell people about what I was doing, their response and feedback would be like, oh, well, they would give me inklings of what the possibilities were if I kept going down that route. And that's what kind of pushed me in that direction.
So you kind of accidentally bumped into being a house hacker by renting out your into. So you were living in one bedroom and renting out like the other bedroom because it's a 2-bedroom.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Got it. How was that? Like, I mean, I know a lot of people, myself included, getting out of college, I had roommates. Like, was it a big deal to have people staying in the extra bedroom at your house? Like, some people are like, oh, I don't want to do that, but obviously there's a big payoff. You're getting a lot of income. So was that awkward? Was that weird to have to do that?
Mm-mm. So the beauty of a split floor plan house is that usually the master and family room are like on some opposite side. And the way the house was laid out, there was a door off of the family room. And from the family room, you went to the master. So if you close that door, it's two completely separate spaces. It was on a corner lot, so there was a front driveway and a back driveway. So I never had to see them. I never had to share anything with them. So it was truly like I was living in a 1-bedroom duplex, and the other side of the duplex was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, and that's what we rented out. So there was no discomfort or, to me, sacrifice to be able to do this.
Yeah, love it. So there's the layout of the house matters, and I want to get into more of the Airbnb strategy, because I know that's something you do really, really well. But picking that right property and the right layout, makes a difference, and you can have some privacy for your tenant or your guest. All right. So I love it. I love how you kind of followed your intuition at first. I want to keep my expenses low. I want to live for free. I want to be independent. You got this independent streak. But then it kind of lands in your lap. All right, here I have this house. I'm doing short-term rentals. I'm doing Airbnb. What were there any kind of moments? You said 2019, you're at a wedding. I loved it. Like, how did you realize, like, this is the thing now? I'm actually going to expand this and do more of it?
So the couple at the wedding, they were actually experienced investors, and we had been hanging out with them. So for an experienced investor with a couple properties to be impressed by what I was doing, because Airbnb was new and foreign back then, right? They had never heard of it. So I brought it to them, got them set up, and they started renting out one of the properties they had on Airbnb. So for them to be impressed with me, they would introduce me as, oh, this is Antoinette. She's really savvy with real estate. I was like, oh, for real, me.
Here we go.
So it was that that kind of gave me the confidence, like, oh, this could be something, because they were telling their friends about what I was doing. And then their friends, it was a couple at the table that was like, hey, I have some free money. I would love to invest, but I can't really do it myself. So I would love to get in a deal with you guys. And I'm like, well, I have to figure out what to do with this. If people are going to be offering me money and wanting to partner on deals, I have to figure out what a deal is and how to actually make one. So it was that.
Awesome. Love it. All right. So what did you do next? What was you kind of got this inkling that there's people who will invest money with you. You got these friends at the wedding. Like, did you go move into another house? Did you buy a rental property? Like, what was the next step?
It was podcast constantly, right? Like constant research, constant learning, trying to understand what the process was, what real estate investing was. And I had started prior to this wedding to kind of do that. but that was like a boost to be like, okay, this is serious. So that was in 2019. So by November 2019, I had found another deal. I had a neighbor. My mom told me the neighbor across the street, she was planning to move and wanted to move. I'd recently been researching wholesaling and all of these other things. So I was like, and she didn't want to list it on the market. So I was like, oh, I know what this is. I know this scenario. And that was my trial, right? I reached out to her, asked her what she wanted for the house, went down and took a look at it, and was able to get her under contract and get that deal because she was like shopping it with a couple other wholesalers. But, our relationship won out. So I was able to get that. So that was my first test. And in that, it was the BRRRR method that I was doing. So I was able to buy it, do the renovations on it, and then refi out the cash. So by the end of the refi, everything that I had put in the house was back with me. And so all of the things I had been reading and hearing on podcasts, I just got to actually experience it. And it was like, oh, I can do this. It's on now. And that was like the rocket ship starting right there.
Love it. So you kind of went from the theory, I'm hearing it on a podcast, to You did this, you turned it into an actual deal. So I have a couple of questions about the deal. Like, one is, what strategy? So you mentioned the BRRRR strategy, which I want to go into a little bit. Was this another Airbnb property? Was this a long-term rental? Talk to me a little bit about how you, and then what this property was like. What kind of, it was a single family house, and how big was it? And what did you pay for it?
Yeah. So this was a single family house in Miami Gardens. So mind you, I'm in Orlando now. So it's a bit of a trek for me. It's 3 hours away, but it's across the street from my mom's house. So I was like, somebody can check on it for me. Yeah. It was single family. And initially I was just going to rent it out. Like, before I ever went down and looked at it, I had a neighbor that was interested in renting it. So I was like, okay, sure, whatever. That's all I was going to do with it anyway. But then when I went and looked at it, it was a decent size. It was like 1,800 square feet. I'd gotten it for 192, and I only put in maybe about 40,000 worth of renovation in it. But the layout, I love homes that do an addition later on because it already has this split layout. So the original house was a 3-bed, 1-bath, and then the owner added on a family room and a master bedroom suite later on. So there was already kind of this separation in the house. And so once I looked at it, it reminded me of the one I'd just done in Orlando. And I was like, oh, I'm splitting this in half, right? So initially the front would have been rented and the back I would have done on like Airbnb or something like that. But when I looked up the data, I didn't think it would do well on Airbnb. And at that time, the numbers were saying that I was going to make the same on a 12-month rent. So much less work, less turnover. I went the 12-month route. So I actually rented out the back 1-bedroom studio to one couple, and then the front to another. So all of my single families do double duty for me, but I have the benefit of getting them at single family price.
Okay. So let's talk about the financing. Cause I know, especially in your first deal, your first true investment deal, a lot of people are like, all right, where do I get 40 grand to fix this property up? How, you did a great job finding the deal, which is awesome. Like, walk me through the actual like sources of financing. And then maybe for those who haven't heard of the BRRRR strategy, what that stands for and kind of how you did the second financing once you refinanced it.
Okay. So in February, I decided I was going to be a real estate investor, right? I've done my research, and my research says that a home equity line of credit is a good way to have access to income. I've done all of this work to the house. There's a ton of equity in it. Let me go do that. So by April, I'd gotten a home equity line on the first house, and they gave me $183,000 because we did a lot of work on the house. Plus the market started shifting, so that worked in our favor. So I had this cash on hand to be able to use, and I'm good with credit. I've always had credit cards with zero balances on it, so I knew I had a source of income there. So when I found that deal in November, I was actually able to operate as a cash buyer and use my home equity line to be able to purchase the property. And then I also learned about private money lending. So I reached out to my family, called my brother-in-law, my sister, scrounged up what loose money they had in the bank accounts. And I was able to use those borrowed private money dollars to do the rehab. So when you hear people say other people's money, this is what they're talking about. I'm using the bank's money on that home equity line to buy the property. And then I used private money to rehab the property, knowing that I would be refinancing it, pulling that money out and able to pay all of those things back.
So all of those were, just so people know, those are short-term sources of money, because you had a home equity line of credit on your home, which is like almost like a checkbook. You can write a check out of that home equity line of credit. You got private loans from your family members, and the total amount was enough to pay for that remodel and the purchase of the house. And then so you got it fixed up, you got it rented out to the two different tenants. How long was it from the time you bought it to the time you then went and refinanced it to get a new long-term loan on the property?
Oh, this is the best part. 45 days exactly.
What?
Right?
All right.
Unheard of, because all the research said that there's a seasoning period and there are these things you have to wait for, and it'll be a year or 6 months. But prior to purchasing that house, I had found an article in a blog that talked about being able to immediately refi as a rate and term if you were able to create the mortgage for yourself. So I had an LLC, and I had my LLC write a mortgage to me. So when it came time to refi, I was doing a rate and term refi on an existing mortgage, and rate and terms don't have a seasoning period. So knowing that going in, that was kind of the key strategy to be able to do that quickly. And I still, like, it's crazy, right? Like, yeah, unheard of. But I wrote a mortgage to myself from my LLC. And then the moment I closed on the property, I started the loan application. So the process would start, and I kind of let the lender know I'm going to be ready for appraisal by the, middle of December, end of October. So let's just not schedule that till then. But I wanted to get the ball moving because I wanted it to happen as quickly as possible. So I was doing the loan application and going through that process as we were doing the rehab, and it was mostly cosmetic. So it didn't take more than 4 weeks.
Got it. So just to make sure I understood each step. So the angle there was you can make a loan, or your LLC made a loan to you personally. So that money you took out of your home equity line of credit, your LLC could then loan it to you. And so you own the property, you borrow it from your LLC, and then you borrow money from the private lenders. And then because of that, you can then go get a loan with a third party, a mortgage company. You can start applying for that right away. And so you bought that property for about $189, if I remember right. Is that correct?
Yeah, $192.
Oh, $192. Okay, $192 plus about $40,000 in costs. What was the total value of that once you'd fixed it up, once you got it rented, after you doing all that work?
It appraised right at $299. My estimate was that it would appraise at $300,000, and the goal was to make sure that there was a 25% buffer between the amount of dollars that I had in there and what it would ultimately appraise for, so that I could get all of my money out of the deal and still have the amount of equity that the banks like to keep in the property.
So that's like for a home run BRRRR deal is one where you've increased the value of the property from the 192 you bought it for to now 300,000 or so. Mm-hmm. And 70% of the 300,000 would be like 210. So like 225 or 250, exactly, something like that. So you could then get a loan for 225, and the bank still has their 30% or 25% equity in the property that they need. But then because you bought it right, because you bought it so low, you now get your money back to pay that home equity line of credit back. You now get your money back to pay your family members. You've got a long-term mortgage. And how much were you cash flowing on this property? Like, was it, exactly, when it was all said and done, what did it look like?
So it did really well. The front unit I was able to rent for $1,750 and the back unit for $1,200. The mortgage on it, with taxes and insurance and everything, were about $1,750. So the front covered it. So that was a $1,200 cash flow coming from that back unit. So I like to call that an ice cold BRRRR, because all of the dollars I've gotten back out, I've done it in record time, and it's cash flowing more than what I, could have ever expected. Because most things you heard about at that time were, $200, $250 a door. And that's, amazing. But $1,200 was the game changer. And I think the key to that was the untraditionalness of the setup, being able to split a single family home. So I'm getting something for single family price that I get multifamily returns on.
Yep. Got it. And then you're also, I want to talk about what's going on right now with the different, markets change all the time, but you also probably got a pretty good interest rate on that mortgage. So you're able to lock in something low. And so, well done. I mean, you've sometimes it's dangerous hitting a home run on your first deal, because then you're like, all right, this is how it should happen. Right. But it's also awesome. I mean, you did a lot of stuff right, and you paid attention to the fundamentals. You got the financing, you got private money. So you put very quickly a lot of different tools on the table and knocked it out of the park. So congrats for that. That was awesome.
Thank you.
And so you definitely got the bug now. You got your house that you live in. You got this rental property. Like what from there? Like you're getting some good cash flow coming in. Did you just automatically go to another one? Did you wait for a while? What was the next step?
So I bought that property in November, but the summer before then, Airbnb was like overwhelming in my primary home to the extent where it kicked me out of it, right? Like Pepsi called, had some summer interns to place. I had one of them in one side of the house, and they called back a couple weeks later and asked if I had another unit. And I said, no, but give me a week and I will. So I packed up all of my stuff. And by that point, I had moved out of my house. I'm living with my boyfriend's mom, right? Because it was supposed to be temporary. But once it happened, I was like, the house is going to do better if I just give it to Airbnb and let that be an investment property. We had to find another place. So in May, kind of before that November deal, I had put a contract on something new construction, but it would take 12 months. And they say in the middle of a contract, you're not supposed to do any like funny financial stuff. But I called my lender when that deal came up, explained to him what my intent was. He checked my debt to income ratio. I gave him I told him when I should expect to be done and have it rented out. And it would still be like 4 months before we were due to close. So he's like, we can squeeze that in. By the time we get to finishing your loan file, that wouldn't be showing up anymore. And that would kind of settle itself. So I was doing a deal while under contract for a new construction, like a new primary home. So December, that deal was rented out. And then April, I closed on the new primary, which was more like a luxury house hack. So single family 3-2 in the front, but I have a detached garage with an apartment on top of the garage. And that apartment was enough to cover half the mortgage. The other half of the mortgage was covered by the back unit at the other deal that I had just done. So now I've moved into more space, better neighborhood, brand new house, and I pay less here than I was paying to occupy the first one that switched to Airbnb.
I love it because the beauty of house hacking, and I've did house hacking as well, is that it's sort of like pays it forward. I mean, you can move up, like you can move up to a nicer house, a nicer neighborhood, and you're basically subsidizing your move up from the properties you kept. And right. I always try to sell this to people, but I think your story is like the perfect way to sell it. Is like, hey, look, you can move up. You don't have to sacrifice. You can always keep moving up by like building on the foundation of those decisions you made. So like your 2-bedroom house, that's rocking and rolling with Airbnb. Your 3-2 house, that's now like essentially a duplex in Miami, that's doing well. And you use those two as your foundation to then get this third house, but you didn't just get the house with a picket fence and just call it a day. You're like, no, I'm still house hacking. I got to rent this apartment out. So all of them are forward steps, but you're still, I guess what I'm trying to emphasize is like, you're not like, you're making financially smart moves, but it's not like you're sacrificing the point of living in a tent or something. Right. Like you're living well.
No suffering, no sacrifice. Because I designed the original house and did that rehab, it was all the things that I like. So yes, it was the smallest house on the block, but it was enough and it looked nice. So everything was always done with comfort in mind. Like your home is important. I get that. But I also understood that all of the decisions that I was making this early in my life would be the foundation for the rest of my life. So a dream house I didn't need right now. I needed my springboard house is what I would call them, the house to the next step. And you could always elevate those surroundings and what that looks like, but it's always with, this is a future rental property in mind. This isn't my dream house. I'm not attached. It doesn't need to be all of these things. But once you do that, by the time you get to the third time of doing that, a dream house isn't real anymore. Like I no longer care about those things. I care about the lifestyle that those decisions now afford me. I care about the freedom that I now have as a result of those decisions. So it's no longer, I'm taking these steps to get to this other point. This is a way of life for me now. The other point is where I am right now, this freedom, and understanding that enough is a good thing, right? Like I don't need more. I don't need a bigger house. I don't need a fancy car. I need to wake up every day and not have to answer to anybody. And that need outweighs all of the other things I might think I want.
That's so beautifully said. And I wanted to let's stick with that mindset piece, because I know, going back earlier to the beginning of your story, even like getting that first job, understandably, I think we were all there. Like, this is a kind of a fear. I just want to make sure I survive. Like, I want to financially be able to pay the bills. But it sounds like you had a switch somewhere in there when you got some confidence, got some, so a couple of properties under your belt where it's like, no, wait a minute. Like, this is not only about surviving, like this is about me having control of my life. This is about me having flexibility. This is about having freedom. You talked about that dream that you had. Like, what's my dream here? Like, what do I want to accomplish? Like, what can you think of anything along the way of those three properties that unlocked a little bit? Like, what were you thinking about this freedom idea and where you wanted to go with it?
It just got deeper. So it was always to not go to my job. Like, for me, corporate America was not a place I ever intended to be or wanted to be, and how I ended up there, as long as I was, I'll never understand it. So it was really just as basic as, I don't want to go to work for somebody. And initially it was, I want to work for myself and be an entrepreneur. But as you experience being an entrepreneur, it's like, this feel like a job a little bit too. I don't want that either. So what are my options for just like the freedom of time, space, and thought to do what moves me at the time? And eliminating expenses became like the key to that, right? Like, if I didn't need money, the choices that I would make would be a lot different. So I shifted the focus from making money independent of a job so I could sustain myself, to eliminating the need for money, so that was no longer the drive. And house hacking provided that. Your biggest expense is the place you live. You go to work every day to put a roof over your head. If you could eliminate that expense, what different choices would you be able to make?
What were some of those choices for you, or what are those? What will those be? Because I think it's fun to hear like your why, your motivation, and you mentioned your partner at the time also had some other motivations. I'm just curious, what was the life kind of calling y'all to do now that you started figuring out some of these financial pieces?
It's shifting now. Initially, it was just like a spoiled, do what I want when I want. And now we're there. And so we're actually in the middle of a shift. Like, okay, well, we first go down, we don't have to go to work every day. Nice life, kind of get up, go to the gym, cook dinner, eat things. It's a nice, peaceful life. But the why is really being redefined for me right now. So the first property that was Airbnb, I'm now considering switching that over to a group home, which is a completely different business model. Now I have staff and patients and things to look after. And maybe somewhere in there, I might find the why, but it's changing. So it was freedom. I have freedom. And now I'm trying to figure out what else. I think the inklings that I'm getting are, to free some other people so I can have people to play with instead of having to wait for people to get off work or take vacation and have the time. So a little bit of what's peaking is to be able to do this with other people, but it's still, under construction.
So well said. And I want to connect a couple dots there. So, I sort of skipped ahead because I got excited about this end of the story, but you had those three properties. I think I remember you just in our other kind of communications, you bought another one since then, right? So you have a fourth property. So you've gotten a lot of income by being deliberate, by being strategic with how you're running these properties out with the right strategy. So you're generating a lot of income from these four properties. You're keeping your expenses low with the house hacking so that you have enough income coming in to pay your bills. So like that's financial independence, that's financial freedom. Yeah. And so now you're getting to explore I've dealt with the same kind of questions in my mind. I like asking you this because I'm dealing with it myself. Like when you finally get that, it's almost like you're kind of getting over a ledge, like you're climbing a mountain. You peek over the top, you're like, all right, let me take a deep breath here. I just want to chill out for a little bit. And it's great. Like it's a great feeling to have your bills paid for. But then it's almost like, for me, it's been like that idea when you're 16 or 18 years old, like, what are you going to be when you grow up? Like, what are you going to do? Yeah. It's like asking that question all over again. Yeah. And it's kind of scary, but it's kind of fun at the same time. And it's cool to hear you're exploring with the group home idea, which would you mind telling people what that is? But it really could be both a business, but also a way to help people who need housing.
Yeah, so it's a home that will house persons, mostly adults with developmental disabilities. So it's providing a safe, caring environment for people to house their loved ones that they may not be able to care for, but within a home. So I had properties, I knew how to do that part, but I'm constantly seeking for a different use for the property, from going from a traditional 1 year lease to Airbnb, that's one shift. Now going from Airbnb to the group home model, completely different, unrelated shift. So that came about by searching for the next best, highest use for the property. But within it, there's probably going to be a lot of good that's going to be done because the quality of the property is always kept high, because I'm coming from a place of service for guests with Airbnb and taking that same like frame of mind, same thoughts on quality and applying that to a new model. We'll see what happens with that. But it's like being at the top of the hill and looking down and you see all these paths. But the beauty of the freedom is you get to choose one. And then if you don't like it, you can go to another one or pick something different, right? Like, so I think for the rest of my life, I'll constantly be redefining what I want to be when I grow up, because I think it's just going to keep changing based on the environment I'm in and the opportunities that pop up.
No doubt. I'm the same way. Like my own personal journey, like being a teacher. I know you said trying to help other people kind of get to where you are so you can have friends who have money too. That's one thing that's called me to teaching. Like I feel like that, being an entrepreneur, being an investor, absolutely part of my identity as well. But teaching and being a person who brings other people along. Like I love that. There's something kind of circular about that, like if you climbed up the mountain, why wouldn't you like stick your hand down and like help some other people get up? So I love that you're doing that. And just this conversation is absolutely helping a ton of people. And what you're doing with your Instagram platform and your website is awesome. So maybe let's talk about that angle, for other people who are at different points and maybe they resonate with your journey, whether it's the very beginning or whether it's along the way. What are some of the lessons you've picked up from your journey? And it could be life lessons, could be financial lessons that you think would be helpful for people who are also making that same climb that you've been doing.
Lessons. Define things for yourself, right? Like there are a lot of messages that we get from society, TV, social media about what you should do and how things should be done. Don't listen to them, like take them under advisement, but go figure it out, have a conversation with yourself and define that for yourself, because you are the best person to know what you need and what's going to work for you and what's sustainable and what you're actually capable of. So I'd say that's the very first one. The second would be to just do it, right? Like don't get caught up in analysis paralysis. You can run these numbers on paper over and over again. You can watch all the podcasts, but you will never know or fully understand until you experience it for yourself. So seek out experience. You have to do it to know what's next. And I'll say that the third thing after that would be to be comfortable with who you are, where you are, your approach. Like understand that just because you did it different or you had to come to it a different way, it doesn't matter, right? Like this is your race totally. Just focus on what your goals are and what your targets are. Block out the outside noise. Don't compare yourself to what other people are doing. Just like get in a really good relationship with you so that you can be sure of who you are and what you want, and let that guide you.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said all three of those are awesome. But the last one about comparison, one of the challenges I have, even with the podcast, is like I want to put people's stories on a pedestal. I want to share amazing people. And at the same time, I want to wrap that in a message of saying, hey, like you listening to this, people listening to this podcast or watching on YouTube, like you started at your own place. Like there's no way for you to compare yourself to me, to Antoinette. Like you have a unique path, and like where you are right now and where you've been, nobody else knows. Right. So like it's no way to compare it. So that's just really an awesome feedback to people that, hey, you're enough. You are where you are. And I guess at best, maybe that lesson is take some tips, take some inspiration when you listen to other people, but to compare yourself and act like it's a race, like it's not. There's there is no way to make that comparison.
Yeah. And I struggled with that, right? Like I struggled with listening to podcasts and hearing all these people do amazing things that I couldn't even fathom, and being so overwhelmed by what I didn't think I could achieve, and having that start to hold me back from attempting to achieve. So it definitely takes kind of silencing that and just being with yourself, and just take your next step forward.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So I want to ask a selfish question because I'm writing a book now called The Small and Mighty Investor. And you and I talked about this offline a little bit, how that's sort of my angle. The platform I'm trying to build is about celebrating smaller investors and saying, hey, you know what? It's enough to keep it small and mighty, and it might be actually a lot better than getting really big. So I want to ask you, Antoinette, like, yeah, you and I both connected on that of being a small and mighty investor. What for you is the reason to keep it small? Like, what, you're growing, you're doing big things, but why not go out there and have 500 units and syndicate and do all that for yourself? Like you've mentioned, kind of your path. But what's your approach to how big your real estate business is going to be?
I don't really want more single family than what I have. I may try to get one other multifamily so that I can shore it up and have like a set of passive income at a certain number. But I'm not building a real estate empire because I would be missing the point. And the point in all of it was freedom to live and do things that brought joy and value to my life, to spend more time with my friends and family. If I continue to scale and build and like do all these things that you hear the gurus talking about, I'm missing the point. I'm not going to have time for friends and family because I'm going to be working. I will now have created myself another job that I own. I would be pursuing money wholly, and money is a tool, but it's not the point of life. So I think for me, I want to focus on living and enjoying my daily life. And I'll do investments in things to enhance that, to be able to have the resources that I need. But those resources aren't the point or the objective. It's living that is.
Got it. I'm with you 100%. All right. So speaking of living, I have to ask you this question before we wrap it up. I know traveling is a big part of your own journey, going different places. I've looked at your Instagram channel. You got some beautiful pictures and some amazing places. And my family and I are getting ready to go to Spain. So like travel bug is in us 100%. Talk to me about like, what are some of your favorite experiences travel wise, and maybe what you're looking forward to kind of doing in the future.
We've had some amazing experiences. So all of them are favorites. But the best ones are the ones that I paid the least amount of money for.
Yeah.
And so my traveling goals are to travel as far as possible for the least amount as possible. So I got into travel hacking and, booking flight deals and covering hotel stays with rewards points. The number one redemption was Maldives. We just did that in April. We were able to get 2 rooms. So my boyfriend's mom was able to join us on this trip for a week in like everybody's definition of paradise, and in an water bungalow. And we did not pay, right? Like 7 nights at no cost, all booked on points. And we found like $1,000 flight deal to get over there. So for me to take a trip that normally costs people, $10,000 to pull off, and we did it for 3,000. Like that is the deal. So we've also done Bora Bora that way. That one we tried couch surfing for the first time to see what that was like. Got a flight deal out, couch surfed, and then used points for the last 2 nights. Bali, China. So Southeast Asia, as you can see, is kind of my favorite. I like going out there, but it's because the dollar is strong. So every trip decision is kind of, where can my dollar go the furthest? What flight deal is available at that time to get me there for the least amount? And do they have a Marriott property so that I can book my hotel with rewards points and not have to pay?
This is so cool. Yeah, we've done the same thing. I've kind of been lazy on my travel hacking on these latest trips. I feel bad because I'm like, all right, wait a second. I'm paying for these trips. When in the past I've done pretty well with this. You've inspired me to sharpen my game a little bit, Antoinette, kind of push this up to another level. But, just from the outside looking in, I'm so impressed with your story, what you've done. And to me, a lot of the common thread that I'm impressed with is just thinking outside the box. Like, whether it's travel, whether it's your house hacking, whether it's the trying different strategies within real estate investing, and also just sort of knowing when to pump the brakes and say, hey, this is enough. and kind of following that your own rhythm, not necessarily just following other people. It's just thinking independently, and then also asking questions that other people aren't asking. Really impressed, Antoinette, with what you've done, and really appreciate you sharing your story and inspiring people. I want to give you the chance to hand off where people can find you. I'll put links to all this in the show notes, which people will be able to find in the podcast description or the YouTube channel description. But just let everybody know what you got going on, where they can follow you if they want to stay in touch with you after the podcast.
Okay. Again, thank you very much for having me and for the opportunity to connect to your audience. This is all new for me, right? Like I was just kind of doing my own thing, and then somebody found out about it, and now I'm having to share way more. So I have a new website. It's fearlessandfreefi.com, where you can sign up for my email list, please, so I can share updates with you guys, as I'm currently working on putting together a course to share all the tricks, tips, hacks that I use to build this lifestyle, because I'm like a regular everyday person that had a regular job and was able to do this. So if I can do it, definitely everyone can do it if they wanted to. And then also on Instagram and Facebook at Fearless and Free Fi.
Great. I will provide links to all that on the podcast description and also on the YouTube channel. Antoinette, really enjoyed this conversation. If you happen to find yourself doing some travel hacking over in Spain in the next year, definitely look me up and let me know. I'm sure there's Marriott properties somewhere in Granada, or at least the travel hacking can get you there on the airplane, but look forward to connecting in person at some point.
No, thank you so much. And definitely we must.
Awesome. Sounds good. Have a great day. Talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you'll also join me for the next episode, where I share the #1 downloaded podcast from my entire show, from the history of my show. It's called How to Buy an Investment Property from Contract to Closing. It's very practical, very nitty-gritty. And I think you'll know as you listen to it why it's been so popular and so helpful. So please join me again next week. If you like the show, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my free email newsletter at coachcarson.com/REI toolkit. In addition to weekly updates, articles, and behind-the-scenes tips from me, my email newsletter subscribers get my real estate investing toolkit, which includes a property closing checklist that I actually use when I buy properties, a real estate deal worksheet, a tenant screening criteria checklist, and other spreadsheets and goodies that will help you on your journey to financial independence using real estate. You can get it all for free at coachcarson.com/REI toolkit. I also want to take this time to thank some people behind the scenes who make this podcast possible each and every week. This includes my podcast editor extraordinaire, Michael Wynn, my amazing virtual assistant, Megan Thompson, my wife, Carrie, who helps me behind the scenes and is my partner here at Coach Carson. And of course, thank you to all of you, the listeners of this show, who make everything possible. This show exists for you. It exists because of you. And I really appreciate you being here for another episode. Everything I've shared with you in this episode has been for general education purposes. I've not considered your specific situation or risks. Before buying your own investments, be sure to consult a financial, real estate, and/or a legal professional. Until next time, I'm Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about helping you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. See you next time.